Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today I want to do something a little bit different. For a while, I've kind of been thinking about some various concepts and ideas that I've wanted to make into videos, but I wasn't really sure how to put them into a video. So what I've decided to do is I'm pretty much just going to talk and I'm going to put some gameplay in the background, and you guys might find this to be better as second monitor content. It's kind of just going to be some insight into something that might help you improve, but it's not really like a solid gameplay concept or anything like that. But today I want to talk about performing well versus playing well, why these are two different things, and how understanding this can lead you to having better and greater improvement. So the first thing for you guys to understand is that good outcomes don't necessarily mean good decisions, and bad outcomes don't necessarily mean bad decisions. So let me give you an example. If you make a decision that has a 5% chance of working out and a 95% chance of failing, it's probably a bad decision whether or not this play succeeds. So if you manage to roll the 5% and this play actually ends up good, it's still a bad decision because, well, you had a 95% chance of failing. So someone that performed well, someone that went 10-0 and carried the game, really 1v9, might have played well. Like they had a lot of good decisions, which led to good outcomes. But they also might have played badly because they had a lot of bad decisions, but they kind of got lucky and had good outcomes. So again, this person that's 10-0, if they took a bunch of plays in a row that only had, a 5 or 10% chance of working out, and they just happened to get lucky that all these plays worked out, sure, they definitely performed well. It's hard to argue that someone that's 10-0 is kind of, 1v9ing, carry the game, winning every team fight, but they might not actually be playing well. So it's very easy to see who performed well from looking at someone's match history or just looking at the score, but it's much harder to see who actually played well, and it kind of requires you to really look at their gameplay, see the decisions they're making, and see if this happens over a large number of games, what kind of outcomes does it normally lead to. So how is this useful to you as the kind of person who wants to improve? Well, I think the biggest thing is to evaluate decisions themselves. The outcomes are sort of irrelevant. It's kind of the same with league games as a whole. Winning or losing, it definitely affects your mental state, right? But in terms of improvement, the outcome of the game just isn't really that important, and rather it's the decisions and the play in the game that actually matters for improving. So as I said before, I really like to think of things as if I do this decision over 100 games, is it going to be good or not for me? It's good to get out of the mindset of only one game mattering, because League of Legends Solo Queue especially is a marathon. You're going to be playing a lot of games over the season, and it just takes a long time to rank up, right? The LP gains are relatively small. You have to play a lot of games, so making decisions that kind of affect or that are good over a large sample size of games is much better than winning one game right now. So one thing you guys might be thinking right now is if I'm talking about evaluating decisions, well, how do you even know if the decision is good or not? And you're right, it is hard to know, especially if you're not a high elo player. Obviously, for me, it's relatively easy for me to look at decisions, and even if it was a good outcome, I can say actually the decision wasn't good, or vice versa. If the play wasn't good, or sorry, if the outcome was bad, perhaps I could still say it was a good decision. So the way to know this is obviously knowing the fundamentals is extremely important, because if you do understand the game at a fundamental level and the reasons behind things and why we do things, it just gives you that much better why, that reason for each decision, and you kind of have a better idea of whether or not decisions are good. So let me give you some examples, because I know this is a bit, it's just a bit esoteric. So if, for example, you're laning mid and you go for a trade against someone and you're not sure whether or not the decision was good, well, if you have good laning fundamentals, you might be able to consider stuff did this guy have cooldowns up? What was the kind of HP advantage, level advantage, item advantage, all this different stuff. Because let's say that this was a good outcome. Let's say you engaged on this guy when he had all his cooldowns up and he could have traded back, but he just he didn't. He was too focused on CSing or something like that. That would probably be a good outcome. But it was actually a bad decision. And you could look at that and be like, okay, well, this guy had all his cooldowns up, and maybe I was missing one cooldown, but I had my other ones, and I probably shouldn't have gone for that. So we could give an example, make it very specific. Let's say you're playing LeBlanc versus Syndra. So when you're playing LeBlanc versus Syndra, you normally look for these WEQ combos, and you kind of looking to either dodge the Syndra E, or just go in when Syndra's E is on cooldown, because otherwise Syndra's E will cancel your dash, right? So let's say you go onto Syndra, you just WEQ onto her, you go straight at her, you don't try to dodge the E at all, but she just doesn't use E in time in order to cancel your W. So this actually would have been a good outcome, but it would have been a bad decision because, well, you didn't consider the things that actually mattered. Does she have cooldowns? What's the important cooldown in the matchup? Kind of like, how do I want to trade on the opponent? Stuff like that. So having a really strong, like, fundamental understanding can help you really evaluate these decisions, much more objectively, rather than just like looking at the outcome and kind of deciding from there whether or not the decision is good. Like, you really don't want to decide if the decision was good or not based on the outcome. Now, the outcomes can kind of give you a clue as to whether or not the decision was good. If you have a good outcome, you might think, oh, like, was that good or not? Well, chances are it was good, although not necessarily, right? But you can look at it and be like, okay, actually, that was a good outcome. How can I replicate that again? Did he have his cooldowns down? Maybe it was good. Or if you had a bad outcome, again, it might give you a clue that it's a bad play, but it wouldn't necessarily, right? Sometimes bad or things that are bad outcomes can still be good decisions and vice versa. So obviously, like, learning the fundamentals takes a really long time, and especially if you're new to the game, it's going to take you a very, very long time to build up this skill. So another really good way to learn, and the way I definitely learned when I was new to the game, when there was much less educational content out there, is to watch like pro player VODs or streams and try to think about the why behind they do things. If you're watching like a pro player or a very high elo player, the chances are that a good percentage of their plays and decisions are correct. Of course, like, not all of them will be right, but enough of them will be. And you can try and think about the why behind what they're doing. Obviously, if you're watching someone who speaks your language, you can just ask them. Like, I talk about this a lot on my stream. And if you've guys watched my like fully explained videos before, that could give you good insight as well. Maybe I'll bring those back. I know a lot of you guys found them useful. Yeah, so maybe I'll consider that as well. So why am I even bringing this up in the first place? A lot of people, they're very fixated on the outcomes of either games or decisions to the point of essentially ignoring the decision itself. And I think that kind of leads to a lot of bad habits, either because your feedback loop is simply, well, if the outcome is good, then you do it again. And if the outcome is bad, then you don't do it again. So again, if you've been paying attention to this, it can really build very bad habits because not all outcomes are good decisions. I also think it's really, really easy to autopilot if you don't think about the decisions themselves, which obviously makes it harder to improve and, of course, harder to win. One thing I've said in a lot of my coaching sessions so far is I actually don't mind if you think about something and get it wrong when you make a decision in game, because at least then we can kind of talk about the information or whatever that, led you to making the decision and why or why not that might be wrong. It's much harder when someone doesn't even think about the play, because then it's like, okay, we have to go back a step and say you need to kind of start thinking about this in the first place rather than diagnosing the decision themselves, because they didn't even make a decision. They just did it instinctually. To kind of summarize and TLDR everything, I think there is a really big difference between just performing well and actually playing well. And your goal when improving is to consistently play well, which should in turn lead to good performance. Good performance doesn't necessarily lead to playing well. So you really don't want to start with trying to perform well and working backwards to playing well, because that really just leads to stuff like KDA players or like coin flip roaming players, where they have this idea of what performing well looks like, so they just try and recreate that every game without actually going through the steps to consistently reach that. So in other words, if you play well, you kind of naturally have like lower deaths, you naturally have like better outcomes, whereas striving for, say, low deaths, striving for these better outcomes doesn't necessarily make you play well. That's why it's really, really important to evaluate the decisions themselves and don't think so much about the outcomes. As a reminder, you can kind of do this by just understanding the fundamentals, watching pro players or streamers, and almost always think about the why behind stuff. If there's one thing I want you guys to take away from the video, it's think about the why and try to have a reason for each decision that you make. Even if the reason is wrong, it's much easier to fix if you're at least thinking about it. So guys, that is going to be it for this video. Let me know if you liked it. It was kind of a different format from normal. There's a few things I really want to talk about. Like, I think the pro meta, how it differs from solo queue, is something I'd quite like to talk about. And actually another one that I'd really like to talk about is kind of, do pro players not adapt enough? Because I know that kind of like the pro meta stagnating is like a big thing people talk about. But honestly, I have a lot of different things I'd like to talk about. So let me know if you kind of like the format. I feel like it's definitely more like second monitor content sort of stuff. The kind of thing that you put on and you just listen to. But yeah, hopefully you guys might find it interesting, and I think it is sort of useful for improvement as well. Obviously not as much as just like a video with, you know, pure gameplay concepts. But anyway, hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you do have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. And of course, tell me if you like the format, if there's something could be improved with it, or if you don't like it, I'd be interested to hear that as well. So anyway, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.